Hey guys, Jake from Michigan here. Hopefully you're having a great season so far. I am talking a little bit quieter today. I am still right behind my house, but also somewhat close to some deer activity. And I didn't really want to be going out of my way to be spooking any deer, so I'm trying to keep it down just a little bit. There's a couple bucks on this property that I would love to have my son get a shot opportunity at. So trying to keep it down just a little bit. But I did want to take some time today to talk to you guys about how you can use the weather to predict which days might offer better hunting opportunities and which days it might be okay to stay home. As all hunters know, there are better days to be in the woods than others. There are some days it seems like the deer are everywhere, they're flying around, and there's other days it seems like nothing's moving and there are no deer out there whatsoever. And while there's no way to know 100%, what days the deer will be moving, we can use the weather to predict which days will offer better opportunities. The hunting season is really long, and we can't sit in the woods every single day. So we want to try to figure out which days are better, which days might not be so good. And right now is kind of the start of the pre-rut, and then after that we'll be getting into the rut. And this is the time of year where a lot of guys are taking time off of work to put in the deer stand. And so we want to try to figure out with that, what days should we be hunting more aggressively? Should we be pushing into those better stands? And maybe which days should we be kind of hanging back, maybe hunting a lower probability stand so we don't pressure or spook out the better stands. There are a lot of factors that impact deer movement, both in a positive and a negative way. There are things that slow movement down, suppress the movement, and there are also things that increase deer movement or like deer movement drivers. And so again, in this video, we're gonna be looking at the weather, how you can look at that 10-day forecast to help predict which days are gonna have a lower probability of deer movement and which days might offer better hunting opportunities. I mentioned there are a lot of factors that impact deer movement, both in a positive and in a negative way. And I'll just give you a quick example of both a positive and a negative factor that impact deer movement. We'll start with the negative one, hunting pressure. You might have a lot of deer movement on your property, and then you and your hunting buddies hunt your property over the weekend, and then you notice the deer movement slows way down. Once deer feel hunting pressure, human intrusion, that negatively impacts deer movement. It suppresses deer movement. Another factor that impacts deer movement in a positive way, and this one's for older bucks, is the breeding season or the rut. During the rut, we see a lot more movement from those older bucks because they're running around chasing does, trying to breed as many as possible. So there are a lot of factors that impact deer movement both in a positive and in a negative way. So you have to look at it as a whole when you're trying to figure out the best days to hunt. But in this video, I want to talk about weather and how you can use the weather to help determine what days have a higher probability of increased movement. And I'm going to start this section of the video and likely end it with the simplest explanation on how you can predict those higher probability hunting days. And the simplest way to put it is try your best to time your hunt to cold fronts. Deer move a lot more after that cold front moves through. So once the front moves through, that's a great time to be in the woods. A lot of times during that front, during the storm, those deer are bedded down, and after the front moves through, those deer get up and start resuming their normal activity. So time your hunt to cold fronts. That's the simplest way to put it. But let's break that down a little bit because you're not always going to have a giant storm that moves through. Sometimes you're just going to have a few changes with the different aspects of weather that are going to keep the deer bedded down. And you want to try to key on those to predict what day might be a better day to go hunting. And we're going to start with the temperature. If temperatures are above average for that time of year in your area, that will suppress deer movement. Deer are not as comfortable moving around when it's really warm outside, and they just move around a lot more once it cools down. Here in Michigan, we had a really warm September, pretty warm early October, and once it started cooling down, like it's a little bit warmer today, but it's been a little bit cooler the past week, and once it cooled down, those deer really started moving. That activity really picked up. So as a hunter, if you're trying to figure out what days are going to be those higher probability days, look at that 10-day forecast. And if you see a warm stretch and temperatures are a little bit above average, and then you see the temperature drop, it cools down. Once it cools down, that is a great time to be in the woods because those deer are going to feel a lot more comfortable moving around once it cools down. Now keep in mind every day it's going to be a little bit warmer in the afternoon and a little bit cooler in the morning. So you don't want to be just looking at the morning low and the afternoon high. You want to be looking at the temperatures from day to day. If one day it's fairly warm, and the next day it's fairly warm, that's pretty consistent. But if one day it's warm and the next day it gets really cold, that's what you want to be focusing on. That's the day that you want to go in to hunt. And the greater the temperature drop, the more likely those deer are going to be on their feet and moving around. The next thing that I want to talk about as it relates to weather and what you should be focusing on when trying to determine when to hunt is the wind. Wind can also suppress deer movement. If you have a really windy day, let's say 20 miles per hour, 25 mile per hour winds with maybe a 30 to 35 mile per hour gust, that's going to suppress deer movement. Deer don't like to move as much when it's windy. There's a lot of stuff moving around. They can't hear as well. They can't see as well. So, deer survive because they can pick out danger. When it's really, really windy, it's harder for them to do that just because there's so much going on. So if you have a really windy day, there's a lower probability that the deer are going to be moving around a lot. So as a hunter trying to figure out what the best day to go out is, you want to be looking at that wind speed and when it drops. So let's just say you do have a day where, let's say in the morning, it's really windy. It's windy throughout midday, 20, 25 miles per hour. But early afternoon, that wind speed drops. Maybe it drops to 8 to 10 miles an hour. That's a pretty significant drop. And that's going to make those deer feel more comfortable moving around, and there's a higher probability of deer movement as that wind speed drops. The next aspect of weather that I want to touch on is rain. Rain is another movement suppressor for deer movement. Now, I'm not talking about like misting rain or a little sprinkle. I'm talking about rain. Whether it's a pretty steady rain or a torrential downfall. Rain suppresses deer movement. When it's raining out, storms moving through, most of the time deer are bedded down. However, once that rain stops, deer are up on their feet moving around. So what you want to be looking at, just like with wind, is you want to try to see when does that rain stop. So let's say it's raining throughout the morning, again in mid-afternoon, and that rain is going to stop around 3 o'clock. Try to get in your stand maybe around 2:30 so that as soon as that rain stops, you're there as those deer start moving around. A quick seasonal tip as it relates to rain and timing your hunts to rain. I mentioned earlier that the pre-rut is starting right now, at least in the northern part of the country. And right now in the pre-rut, bucks are making scrapes, working scrapes all the time. This is what they're going to do for the next 10 days. However, just like the rest of the deer herd, when you have a pretty good rain, those bucks are most likely bedded down. But as soon as that rain stops, a lot of times these bucks get up and they freshen up their scrapes. We see this on our trail cameras quite a bit, and cell cameras have made this even cooler. You can be outside and see the rain stop, and within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you'll get a hit on your cell camera. It's at one of the scrapes, and you'll have a buck working the scrape. So it's pretty cool just to see the timing in real time, that as soon as the rain stops, these bucks are back up hitting those scrapes. So again, if you have rain or a little storm that's moving over your property and you can see when it's likely to stop, that's a great time to slip into a stand, because that rain's going to suppress the movement, but as soon as it's done, there's a good chance the deer will be up on their feet moving around. And the last thing that I want to talk about that you guys should be looking at to help predict those higher probability days is the barometric pressure. Now, there's some talk out there that the barometric pressure has no impact on deer movement, but me personally, and this is anecdotal, I have noticed an increased movement when the barometric pressure is higher. Now the barometric pressure is associated with that front moving through. As that front moves in, pressure decreases, and as the front moves out, the pressure increases. So barometric pressure is tied to cold fronts. But again, I will say, me personally, and there's a lot of other hunters that say the same thing, notice increased deer movement the higher the barometric pressure is. And I honestly don't know why this is, and I'm not going to pretend to know, but I do have family members that might have like a bad shoulder or a bad elbow. I've got a reconstructed knee, had ACL surgery in high school. And I can tell you that high barometric pressure kind of irritates these areas. It doesn't really hurt, there's irritation there. They're a little bit more sensitive. And again, I don't know, but maybe wildlife, deer, they're impacted as well. They are much more aware, in tune with their environment, their surroundings. So maybe that barometric pressure increase kind of irritates those sensitive areas that they have. And so as that barometric pressure starts to rise, starts to really increase, the deer, they want to get up and start moving around and start working those, sensitive areas that might be getting irritated by that rising barometric pressure. Again, I have no idea why, I'm just theorizing, but I have noticed, as well as many other hunters, that there is an increase in deer movement as that barometric pressure starts to increase. So I wanted to talk about it just as another thing to focus on when trying to predict those better hunting days. And those are really the big factors that I'm looking at as it relates to weather, to try to time my hunts to those higher probability days. And the more of those factors that you can tie in together, the better. I said it kind of when we started talking about weather that I was going to start with the simplest explanation and end with the simplest explanation. And really a lot of those are associated with fronts, those cold fronts. So as that front moves through, you're going to have a temperature drop. Now sometimes you're going to have a larger drop than others, but you're going to have a temperature drop. A lot of the time you have rain associated with that front. You have wind associated. And as that front moves through, everything calms down. No more rain, wind slows down, temperature drops, barometric pressure rises. This is a great time to be in the woods. Now, there's not always going to be a massive storm that moves through. That's why you want to try to look at these things individually as well. But the simplest way to look at weather to help time your hunts to those higher probability days is to hunt post cold front. And the website that I'm using to look at all these different factors, and the one that I'm showing B-roll of, is Weather Underground. So weatherunderground.com, put in your zip code and look at the 10-day forecast, and you can customize it to see precipitation, temperature, wind, cloud cover, barometric pressure. Weather Underground has everything in one spot, and it's the only website that I use when trying to predict those higher probability days. Hopefully this video was helpful for you guys, and you guys can now use the weather to find those better days to push into your favorite stand location. Thanks again for watching, guys, and let us know if we can help you change your property for good.